Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive headfirst into a classic tale that has literally captivated audiences for generations. We are unpacking the amazing story of Androcles and the lion. So whether you're an 8th grader analyzing some really powerful themes of kindness and gratitude, or honestly just someone who loves a gripping story of survival and, well, a totally unlikely friendship, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to break down this incredible narrative, examine the unbreakable bond between man and animal, and look at the surprisingly wild places where we find true empathy. Let's get into it. To kick things off, I want you to picture a truly terrifying scenario. Just imagine it. What would you do if you were suddenly thrown into a massive sandy arena, totally unarmed, with a starving, ferocious lion? Think about that absolute terror. You're standing there, completely alone, the ground is vibrating, and you know a deadly, hungry beast is about to be released right at you. Your heart is pounding out of your chest. There is zero escape. Right, so let's set the scene for this high-stakes moment. According to our source text, everybody is gathered for a public execution. The emperor is sitting up high in his box, the trumpeters are blowing their horns, the crowd is just roaring, cheering for some brutal entertainment. And then there's our main character, a really kind, gentle man named Androcles. He's dragged into the arena, his chains are taken off, and he is just terrified. I mean, in his mind, he's absolutely certain this is his last day on Earth. A heavy wooden gate is raised, and that ferocious lion is let loose. But hold on. Let's freeze frame for a second. To actually understand how a gentle guy like Androcles ended up in a literal life-or-death nightmare in the middle of a screaming arena, we have to pause the action. We need to rewind the clock and look at his past. Because the source text tells us a story of a truly desperate escape, and that is the foundation for this whole crazy sequence of events. So, going back a bit, Androcles was not a free man. He was a slave to a deeply wicked, heartless master. Under the laws of that time, he was what they called bound by law. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, it meant he was forced to obey his master completely. Slaves back then had no freedom, absolutely no rights. You couldn't just up and leave if you were treated badly. You were treated as property, totally at the mercy of whoever owned you, no matter how cruel they happened to be. And unfortunately for Androcles, his master was horribly cruel. The abuse was just unbearable. The guy starved his slaves, whipped them relentlessly. In fact, it was so bad that Androcles genuinely felt death would be better than staying there. And look, he wasn't a coward. He was just pushed past his breaking point. So he kept his eyes peeled, and at the very first opportunity, he made a massively courageous choice. He slipped away, escaping his master's clutches, and ran off to hide out in the wild forest. Wandering around the woods, Androcles was finally happy. Sure, he didn't have a roof over his head, but he was as free as a bird. But one day, that peaceful new life took a wild turn. He's just walking along and suddenly comes face to face with a massive wild lion. Obviously, a jolt of pure terror hits him. His first instinct is just to turn and run for his life. But he freezes. He realizes the lion isn't actually lunging at him. Yeah, instead of roaring or, acting like a giant apex predator, the lion does something completely unexpected. It looks at him piteously. It's actually moaning and whimpering. Its eyes seem to be silently begging, "Please help me." The poor thing was in obvious pain. So Androcles, showing an incredible amount of empathy and bravery, stops. He takes a breath and very, very cautiously starts walking toward this terrifying animal. As Androcles gets closer, the lion literally lowers its head and starts licking its own swollen paw. Talk about a leap of faith, right? Androcles looks closely and spots this huge thorn jammed right into one of the lion's toes. So he reaches out, carefully pulls the thorn free, and then tears off a piece of his own clothing to bandage up the wound. Think about that for a second. He risks his own life to show kindness to a deadly predator. And how the lion responds is the absolute heart of today's lesson on gratitude. In a completely shocking display of thanks, this fierce wild beast licks Androcles' arm. It totally understood what he had just done. That one simple act of kindness kicked off this beautiful, totally unlikely friendship. Androcles stuck around, cleaning the lion's paw every single day. Before long, they were literally living and hunting together in the forest, sharing meals like best buddies. But as you might guess, this idyllic forest life couldn't last forever. After weeks of roaming free, their luck just ran out. One day, while Androcles was out wandering on his own, soldiers who were sweeping the forest captured him. And, completely separately, the lion was captured too. The soldiers dragged Androcles back to the city in heavy chains and threw him into prison, while his lion friend was locked away in a cage. Now, we have to talk about the brutal reality of the justice system back then. You see, Androcles' master had reported him missing, and because running away was considered an incredibly serious crime, the punishment was absolute, and it was gruesome. Runaway slaves were condemned to be fed to wild beasts for public entertainment. That little taste of freedom had essentially sealed his doom. And boom, that brings us right back to where we started this explainer, that horrifying moment in the arena. Androcles is standing in the sand, weak and totally terrified. The gate flies open, and the beast that charges out, it's been deliberately starved to make it as aggressive as possible. The lion spots Androcles and just sprints at him, bounding and roaring. Androcles braces himself, absolutely sure this is the end. But then, magic happens. The terrifying beast suddenly hits the brakes. It stops dead in its tracks. It starts moving forward, but slowly this time. All of that terrifying rage just evaporates. Androcles squints, looks a little closer, and no way, they recognize each other. It's his buddy from the forest. Can you imagine the crowd's reaction? To the absolute shock of the emperor and thousands of cheering people, this deadly predator doesn't attack. Instead, it bounds right up to Androcles, starts purring like a giant house cat, and affectionately rubs its nose against him. Androcles is so overwhelmed he just throws his arms around the lion, crying tears of pure relief and joy. The entire arena is completely silent, watching this incredibly tender reunion in total awe. This moment brilliantly captures the core theme we're unpacking today. The emperor is stunned and demands to know what on earth is going on. When he hears the story, it sets up this massive, glaring contrast. Think about it. On one hand, you have the so-called civilized human master, a guy who ruthlessly starved and whipped his slaves with zero empathy. On the other hand, you have an untamed wild beast. Yet, it was the wild animal that remembered a single, simple act of kindness and repaid it with endless loyalty. It really flips the script on who the real monster is, doesn't it? The emperor is so deeply moved by this powerful story of gratitude between a man and a beast that he issues a royal decree right then and there. He orders that Androcles be set completely free. He is never to be a slave again. But here's the best part. When the emperor asks what else he desires, Androcles is selfless one last time. He doesn't ask for gold or house. He just asks for his lion to be free too. The emperor agrees, and the two best friends stroll right out of the city, heading back to the forest to live out their days in total freedom. It's just such an amazing story, right? And it leaves us with a really provocative question to wrap things up. If a wild, starving animal has the capacity to remember and return one small act of kindness, how might we practice that exact same gratitude with the people around us every day? Really think about that as you go about your week. How can you be the Androcles in someone's life? Or how can you show the profound gratitude of the lion? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep being kind, and I'll catch you guys next time.